I'm really pleased to have such a great panel in front of me, and I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. So I'm just going to dive right in. And my first question is, how can estate teams ensure that buildings are fit for purpose, from accommodation and shared spaces to learning and leisure facilities? And yeah, Donna and Stephen, if you want to sort of reflect on your own institution's approach to that would be quite interesting too. So I'm going to start off with you, Donna.
Yeah, that's fine. We've obviously we have a kind of mixed bag. We're a 5-campus university, so we've had to have a rethink on a lot of our spaces, even just to accommodate social distancing, which was where we were all headed before the lockdown became more permanent. What we've been doing is opening up space. So the way that our oldest campus, which is Paisley campus, was built was that there's a central core, which was landlocked offices, if you like, with very poor ventilation, no windows, and not a great space for students to be in. Part of what we've been doing in the interim is opening these spaces up and creating larger spaces, larger rooms, and opening up areas and opening up more windows into areas just to try and free this space up. Part of that has been turned over to larger structured classrooms, although they've all got different pedagogies. But also part of that has also been turned over to open learning spaces, which have proven to be hugely popular. And all of these spaces are digitally empowered. So we are trying to use as much of this free time that we have. If we have a silver lining with COVID, then it's just that we've got time to do these things on campus, bearing in mind the financial restrictions that we're all under. But we're trying to make our spaces as large, as flexible, and as naturally ventilated and brightly lit as we possibly can. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing that we're doing just now, other than toilet improvements and hand washing improvement programs.
Great. Stephen, let's go to you next.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Anna. So the University of Surrey, we're a 60s campus. We're based in Guildford, obviously in the south of England. So for us, we're obviously doing exactly what Donna's doing. So making obviously spaces COVID secure, the signage, the alcohol gels, et cetera, which every university in the UK has been doing. But what we've also been doing at Surrey, we were doing a number of different projects before COVID, where we were talking to students and actually asking what space they want. The advantage we have with the 60s campus, of course, is that a lot of the space is quite flexible. So the floor to ceiling height, the structural grids enable us to make some flexible space. So what Donna was talking about, natural ventilation, a lot of our space is already naturally ventilated anyway. So we created, before COVID, 2 projects called My Surrey Hive and My Surrey Nest. We interacted with students and we spoke to students and really asked them what space they wanted. So My Surrey Hive is very much a one-stop shop for students to come to find out about issues they've got, whether that's issues on accommodation, issues with their course, etc. But My Surrey Nest was very much about a breakout space, a very different space where students were fully involved in the design, but it enables them actually for a space that if they're a commuter student, they can come and sit. It's an alternative space to the library, but it's still a learning and supporting space, but actually it's more relaxed. It's a furniture solution actually. But what we have noticed all the way through COVID is that actually, the benefit or the question is the space right for its use? Well, actually, students have still been coming to these spaces. It's worth noting, of course, in the COVID pandemic that we're in, of course, is that we've had about 3,500 students on campus all the time. So we haven't really had a situation where we've been closed. We've all been open and active. And we've had to put COVID secure measures in the library. But as Donna's talking about, we were actually how we make other space available that's COVID secure. The final thing to note, of course, is we have a great advantage at the University of Surrey that we have lots of open space, lots of green space. So we've put marquees up, we've done different outdoor, indoor spaces really, so marquees with the sides up so they're naturally ventilated, but it's enabled students and staff to have a coffee in a socially distanced way, but also we've used a marquee to be socially distanced and to be a study space as well.
Yeah, great. That all sounds interesting. Sorry, Donna, were you going to hop in there?
Yeah, I mean, we've done similar, Stephen, in as much as we've been trying to turn our inside estate outside, which is not always great in Scottish weather, but we've found that patio heaters are quite flexible in a marquee type situation as well. we've been taking away a lot of car parking spaces, so it's been trying to hit some of our green credentials as well. So we've been taking away car parking spaces and turning those into outdoor social spaces for students to come and congregate. And we've had pop-up coffee carts. And in some of the other areas that we've opened up, we've been introducing comfort catering. So it's done through a contactless free and vending machines. So we put free coffees in some places for students. Because like you, we've had very limited students actually on campus. Out of 21,000 students, I think that the numbers are in the hundreds. Bear in mind, of course, that I think our restrictions are slightly more stringent in Scotland when it comes to the bodies that are allowed on campus. So we've been trying to make it as user-friendly. Most of our students who've been coming onto campus during this time, they are residents within our residences, and we pretty much see the campus as an extended campus, and it's an extended part of the residence. So there are resident students. So we've been trying to create outdoor sports facilities, recreational sports facilities for them. We've got some outdoor gyms that are going in now in anticipation that we don't really know when COVID is going to end. We don't know when there's going to be actual real changes to how we can actually just behave as human beings. So we're trying to cover all bases going forward, really.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. That it sounds like you guys are really putting some creative ideas in there. I just wondered, Katrina, from your perspective, what do you think is really important when universities are addressing development and design of these spaces?
Thank you for inviting me along today. My background is actually as an architect doing commercial office buildings, but I've spent sort of 30 years looking at how people move through space and utilizing inside-out design and environmental psychology as the basis for the architecture. So I've always taken a different view of it and always put the individual, the occupier, at the heart and soul of it. So thinking about a university is a different building type, obviously, to commercial office building, but ultimately it's about the people that live and work and play there. So we've been studying the higher education sector. So I am the outsider, so forgive me if some of what I say is not relevant or possibly you've already thought about it. But in taking the studies that we've been doing, I was thinking back to the sort of the life cycle of an individual. And when you're born, obviously as a baby, you're allowed to play and roam around and crawl where you like. Primary school is very much about play and moving around. A lot of secondary schools are also about starting to get choice and movement. And higher education seems to me to be the next step along that journey. But two things come out. One is the students that I've interviewed want to have a distinct separation from high school to university. They want to make sure that they feel that they are on the journey to maturity, that they have left high school behind, secondary school, and that they are now embarking on sort of the adulthood section. So I think we have to be careful not to confuse the play aspect too much with the reality of maturity and the journey. But it also strikes me as then moving on into the office is that we've had all this wonderful sort of 18 years or so freedom, and then you come to university and you're also quasi-free as well because you have to choose for yourself, be self-disciplined, but then you get into the workforce and then you're sort of tied to the desk. So my perspective is about the ball and chain to the desk, and really what the pandemic has shown us that we can move freely, we can be agile, which is really what I promote, because then we come back to home and we can work anywhere at home, which is what we've now found. So for me, it's the office component that's lagging behind, not the education component. So my interests is why the office is behind the education scenario, but also I am interested in the buildings that are built for any commercial setting, be it university or other, is that it's typically 4 to 8 years in the pipeline before anybody actually uses it. So it's either acquiring the land, it's getting permission, it's building the building, getting the fit out done, and then before the occupiers come. So if you look at the gestation of a project of anywhere from 4 to 8 years, you're actually not looking at the higher education students that have already made their mind up about university, where they're going, what they're going to study. It's actually younger than that. So the secondary school age group of the 13 to 18-year-olds is where we've been focusing our research recently. and we did a study and a poll of what they're looking for. And interestingly enough, is exactly what Donna and Stephen have said, is that 100% wanted daylight, access to daylight. 80% wanted access to food. And I've learned from my own 3 kids that all they do is eat all day. So they want to graze and have places to get food and beverage. 75% wanted outdoor space, and 73% wanted quiet space. So I think what was interesting is balancing those types of functions as well. I have one of my children, my daughter is ADHD and OCD, and falls in the category of 10% of our population are what we call atypical. And so looking at the neurodiversity of the population mix, that's quite a large percentage if you look at 10% of any population group. And so you take London alone, and we're almost 10 million, that's 1 million people. And I think what's important is that those spaces for learning and collaboration are not just the funky open spaces, but they actually are the very dedicated quiet spaces. So you have rooms that are not just quiet, but the furniture is absolutely, you know, walls up, you know, I'm focused, and that they can actually look in on that and choose to go there. So those are all the things I've been thinking about.
Great. I think there's a really interesting insights there that I think would definitely be helpful for universities. And yeah, one thing that you mentioned there was this there's lag from when you develop a building to when it actually goes up and it's made. And the problem with COVID is that things change so rapidly and so quickly. I'd like to ask Donna and Stephen, sort of, how did your university react to that really rapid change? How do you ensure that you're getting those things right when normally they would take quite a long time to develop? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff was already in the pipeline for us. This was a trajectory that we were already on. I think that we were able to accelerate only because we weren't on campus, that we didn't have students on campus. So that gave us more flexibility in actually getting works done and actually taking walls down and opening areas up. An interesting point that Katrina raised, though, about neurodiversity and different types of students and different requirements for students. A big part of that has also been that we've managed to free up, because academics and professional services staff become more agile in working, that we've managed to free up some of these single person offices and actually give those over to students, the bookable space, if they want just quiet space. Because although we've all turned over to everyone working from home, one of the main comments that comes back is that in this time of digital poverty, that not all households have access to a quiet space that people can go and study. And so we've been extending these rooms, and a lot of our postgraduate spaces, we've extended those to undergraduates, that they can come in and book this space in order to get that quiet study space. And it's right, it's trying to get the balance, but really though, apart from the quick switch, which my colleagues in digital did a tremendous job on working with academics, I can take absolutely no credit for that, but they did a great job. We've been running at their heels behind, because we had so much of it in planning, and also we were flexible in what we did. So we were basically emptying large rooms and changing the furniture of the pedagogy that was in those rooms so that we could turn those into bookable spaces. So it might be a larger room, but there might be 2 people studying in it. So it's really just being agile in our thinking and agile in our response to it. I don't know about you, Stephen.
So I think for us, it was in sort of 3 main phases, really. The first phase was absolutely getting our space absolutely COVID secure. So it was all hands to the pump, really. So we would have, you know, cleaners that were cleaning effectively non-student facing areas. We would have them putting up the signage and assisting with the signage. It's an example of just, you know, all hands to the pump with their health and safety colleagues, with their faculty colleagues. You're absolutely right, Donna. You know, our IT colleague did an amazing job where, you know, they really made the transformation from effectively very much face-to-face teaching to sort of hybrid teaching, you know, and pretty much online teaching. The second phase was obviously, as government guidelines changed, we needed to adapt to that, you know, and as we noticed where we'd got, for example, where we would have large groups of students actually self-isolating, what do we do with things like in our own accommodation? What do we do with things like, well, where do they go outside and exercise, for example? So we had all of that sort of challenge of that sort of midpoint. The third part and the third phase is obviously post-COVID, so looking at doing things differently. So we're doing exactly as you indicated. We're you know, we're taking this opportunity where people have worked from home, that people have, you know, most staff have enjoyed working from home, but of course there are some staff that haven't enjoyed it, have had to, you know, educate their children at home, for example, been shielding, for example. So there isn't a one size fits all model. But what we have been doing is looking at how we can have some of our professional services staff where they're going to work from home for say 2 or 3 days a week going forward. So post COVID, they don't need a desk for 5 days a week. So how can we compress some of that space up? And we've been doing that with, you know, for example, our HR colleagues, our finance colleagues, our marketing colleagues, our comms colleagues, and making them compress into space and actually bringing in more agile working. Obviously, it gives a further complication about, you know, COVID security and cleaning desks, etc., when people aren't sharing facilities. But that is solvable. But what it's enabled us to do is some of this space actually. So our finance department is very much in the heart of our campus. When they move out, and they're moving out in the next couple of weeks into a different building, we will convert this space into more student space. So following on from the My Surrey Hive, My Surrey Nest, we will then start looking at different types of space, interact with students and doing things that actually, so we're prioritising, you know, which is what our mantra is at Surrey, which is about student experience. So how do we provide the right space for students and how do we make ourselves more efficient? There are advantages of doing this, of course, let alone things like, you know, it's cheaper actually when you're occupying less space, but it enables us to deliver other agendas such as our carbon zero or net carbon zero target that we set for 2030 as an example of sort of the implicit other advantages of COVID, if there ever are any advantages of COVID, of course.
Yeah, I do think it's good to take some positives away from what has clearly been a terrible year. So that's great to hear those things. I wondered, Katrina, if you had any thoughts on how institutions can be nimble when thinking about buildings and reacting to sort of unforeseen circumstances like we have been.
Well, I think the whole thing about agility is really interesting, and the work that we've been doing also on brand digital transformation, which is ultimately, I think universities have to play a big part, because you have to advertise your brand and you have to make sure that you live and breathe your brand so that students choose to come to you, is really important in this day and age, especially after the year we've gone through as far as the brand being agile. So it means everything from listening to the students, as Stephen was saying, asking them what they want, being able to react very quickly to that. So some things you can foresee, like we know that the younger generation were already ahead of the game in terms of sustainability and importance to the planet. But I can tell you that the people that pay the bills are probably the parents to a large extent. And like any fund or company, they're going to be looking at universities and where the money comes and where the brand is, and do they have a social footprint? And do they have a social responsibility to net zero carbon, as we've mentioned, to the ESG agenda? And so when you talk about being agile and nimble, it's probably alongside of flexibility, the sort of two most important words going post-pandemic. So the simple things will be adding more water points, which you probably have, but it's adding disposable containers, it's adding recycling bins, but not just ugly bins in the open, but discreetly designed. What I've been surprised at is that everybody is aware of creativity now, and everybody is noticing design. So in our own homes, we're finding curated backdrops. We're finding out what colors look good for each of us if we're on a Zoom call. People are now taking notice of design. So where I sit in what I do, and probably both of you, Donna and Stephen, it's fantastic that design and creativity are high on the agenda. So I think that we can be responsible and agile and nimble in lots of ways. The other one I would say is the communications. What we've all learned post-pandemic is that the communications in most organizations have got far better than they ever were, because you can do a Zoom call like this, with 30, 40, 100 people joining very quickly and get a message across. One of the questions that I have is, post-pandemic, will people start to forget about the comms plan or communication? So it's not just thinking that you're walking the talk, it's actually saying it and advertising it in your communications, I think is really important as well.
Thank you. Yeah, some really important points there. And yeah, thinking about listening to the student voice and working out what people want, is there a place for data in all of this? Can universities collect data to improve their estates and spaces, and is that something that you guys are currently working on? Stephen, you nodded there, so I'm going to go to you.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So for us, what we've been doing, we've been using, we know that students are very, computer literate, so they'll have multiple devices and they will access the Wi-Fi at Surrey. We've been using that to basically try and find out where we've got hotspots of density for students, actually. So we've been using data in the side of, we're not accessing, who it is, we're just accessing, there's so many devices accessing the Wi-Fi in that area. And what that's enabled us to do, of course, is then to dispatch, for example, security, to say, actually, if there are too many people in an area and it's not following our COVID secure rules, can we do that in a different way? And it's just using the data to actually say, what is the density on campus? Because what we're also trying to work out, of course, is where do students want to congregate in a COVID world, but actually where will they want to congregate in a post-COVID world? And I am really interested at Surrey. I've worked in a number of universities in the last 15 years, but as a campus university, which Surrey is, things like the library are really popular. Whereas actually, I previously worked in London universities, and the libraries would be popular during the day, but they'd be less popular actually in sort of what I would call outside of normal hours. But actually, you can see the library at Surrey is very much a congregation point for our community of students. I'm probably old enough to remember when libraries had books in them, but actually, students now, they access the books and the book collections, but actually it's very infrequently. It's more about, social study space, it's more about interaction. And actually, if I think about, my own eldest daughter, she goes to the library because actually she can't use her mobile phone and it stops her looking at, Instagram and other things actually. So there are different ways that we can use technology, but clearly data needs to drive decisions. What we need to make sure is that we engage with students at every level possible, and talk to them and actually start to sit down. For me personally, what I tend to do when I come on campus, I tend to sit in student areas and just watch students just to see what they're doing. And actually you can see, the type of furniture that we need, the type of areas they congregate to, the type of areas they don't congregate to. And the points that both Donna and Katrina are making is that they won't come to areas that are just internal areas with no windows, that are cold, that aren't well ventilated, that have poor, decoration. But the areas that do have, natural light, natural ventilation, will be close to a catering outlet, they will absolutely gravitate to that. And actually they will stay there for most of the day.
Can I just pick up on a couple of things that Stephen said there? I mean, he's absolutely right. And picking up on the library point, we're in the process of doing the second phase of some works in the library. We used the data that we had because we'd switched to a click and collect service for our students so that they could effectively go online, identify the books or the chapters or whatever that they wanted. The librarians would then access it, scan it and email it to them if it wasn't available on an ebook. We were able to use that data because librarians are always precious about the number of books that they have within the library. Maybe sometimes we have a conflicting view, but with this time we actually had data to drive the fact that we could actually utilise some other space that we were freeing up. That was some of this interior space elsewhere on the ground floor because of the weight. That we could then, we're in the process of moving these books and the racking down, and they'll continue to do this click and collect service. And we're actually freeing up more social learning spaces actually within the library, as well as a quiet area it's going to be established in a separate wing. So in this instance, this is actually given us, because the foot was off the pedal and we were able to actually get proper recorded data on how often are these books getting taken out, what's being asked for. Do we really need all these journals from 1962? So all of these questions were being answered. We've been asking the questions for a wee while. We've not always been able to get answers on them. So that's also helped. And the other thing to pick up on the catering aspect of it, because our catering outlets are almost closed, we've used some of our catering staff to help with the signage, additional cleaning, and we've repurposed them. They've moved temporarily into different jobs. But what we have also done is that we are putting comfort catering into areas that we know that students are congregating. So we formed some of these nice new areas, which being the University of the West of Scotland, we called the Nook and the Cranny. And they're large open areas, but they have this comfort catering there. So staff are producing the food and they're putting it in, but they're going into these food vending machines. So it's fresh produce, And we've also introduced a Round app. So the Round app is actually an app where students can order their food, and it's basically made fresh to order for them. And on that, we're also trying to collect data from our students that we have, our captive students, as we like to call them, the ones that are staying in residence. So we offer them a discount on food if they take part in our focus groups. So the focus groups have been actually very informative for us, and that's asking students who are there, who are on the ground, and who are still using the campus almost on a daily basis. What would they like to see? How would they like to see it? These are some ideas that we're looking at. These are some things that we think that you might like, and actually getting that affirmation or not is really positive in helping us move forward. So it's all about using the data that we have, but also trying to get as much new data on what we're doing and are we doing it right is really important going forward.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like you're all using it in really interesting ways. Katrina, I just wanted, did you have any thoughts on this?
Everything that you said, both of you, Don and Stephen, fantastic. I think, again, where we sit is we collect loads of data. So pre-occupancy, post-occupancy is really important that you have a benchmark before you set out doing a project so that you understand what the baseline is and expectations, but obviously you have a measurable afterwards for post-occupancy, which I think is really good information to feed in, not only for statistical, for finance, obviously somebody has to fund the real estate programs, but also for the comms plan that we talked about. But I think the discussion at the moment has all been around what the students want, and what we're finding, certainly in the office component, is that it's all been about the last year about what the employees want. We have to make sure the employees feel safe. Do the employees have a chair and computer screen at home? But actually, quite frankly, it's a business at the end of the day. And so we're now asking, what does the employer want? And so in the university setting, I would also say, what do the teachers want? What do the faculty want? Because I think we shouldn't forget the students, because they pay the bills, but ultimately we do have to think about the students, the faculty and the people in administration and what they're trying to do and achieve as it's a business too.
Thanks, Katrina. That really nicely moves me on to what I wanted to ask next, which was about staff, but also staff and student interaction. And is there a way that, or is there something you're thinking about, how you can sort of use spaces to facilitate interactions between staff and student, make sure it's sort of the university is a place for the community as a whole, everybody in there.
Go ahead. I would just say very quickly from the studies that we've done is the students like to engage with the teachers if they can. I'm not sure if the teachers want the students to drop in whenever they can. The flip side, and perhaps Don and Stephen can comment on that, but the students that we've spoken about like that sort of quasi mix where they know that this is sort of they can come to the teacher area and find an informal breakout space that they will find their teacher and have an informal chat, but they know that their own office or their private space is off limits. So I think it's that middle ground that's quite an interesting combination.
Definitely. Stephen, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of different levels here, isn't there, really? I think there's something about making sure that the space that, the academics with the students interact in are COVID secure, and obviously that's part of that process, and that's ventilation, that's distance, that's et cetera, et cetera. But I think the thing to remember, of course, is for most of the time in the last 12 months, we have continued some form of teaching. There are some courses that have to be face-to-face, a paramedic can't learn to be a paramedic unless they're actually physically, in the classroom with the people, actually doing the real sort of, the sort of work really. So yeah, we've had to do that. We've had to work out how we do that, and we've obviously taken lessons from the NHS. We are very lucky that we are neighbours of the NHS of the Royal Surrey. So we've been able to do that. We've been able to share stories and sort of challenges through that process. But it is about, what we have noticed, of course, is that, partly about hybrid teaching, how that's worked. We've made the transition, and actually students have quite liked some of that. They still want to come on campus. They still want some face-to-face teaching. But actually, in a large lecture where there's 200, 300, 400 students, actually online is fine. And actually, they can do it they don't have to come in at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. They can actually do it at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday night, and they can get just as much from that. And I think that, the things we will learn from COVID is that actually that, we can do things in a different way. and we do lots of pulse surveys with students to ask what they like and what they don't like, and what we're doing and how we can change things. And actually, hybrid teaching has worked very well. As I said, they still want to come on campus, but actually they also want, some of this flexibility about online teaching. And, one-to-one sessions with an academic can be done absolutely through some video conferencing software. And that works really well. There is a divide between effectively the risk profile of, say, a 19, 20-year-old student compared to, say, a 55-year-old academic, and we do need to be very, and the way students are, how they make themselves safe, how do they feel safe on campus, and where they don't feel safe, how they can report that and how they can have a meaningful conversation with someone that, makes adaptations to the physical space or to their ways of working to make sure they feel safe and secure to come on campus. Because ultimately, security and safety is the primary aim of what we're trying to do on every campus in the UK.
Can I just pick up on some of that? Sorry, I'm not on yet. Just picking up on some information that I'd read recently. I think it was Wonky and Pierce had conducted a survey, and 59%, the most important thing that students were looking for was that there was good quality online delivery of learning and teaching. And part of that was also going forward with the hybrid model is that we retain the flexibility that the hybrid model enables us to have. So your face-to-face, Katrina, may well be a virtual face-to-face in the way that we are face-to-face currently, or it may be an on-campus face-to-face. But I think it's just getting that one-to-one interaction that students are keen to maintain. How that's delivered will pretty much depend on the availability of the lecturer, but also the preference of the student, because if they're only going to have this 10-minute interaction with someone and they've got lectures that are getting delivered online, then it may suit them to stay within their own home or their own residence or wherever they are. But it just is, I think we're going to have to be really flexible going forward in how we deliver, and that we embrace some of these changes that students are looking for, which is if we're going to be interactive in some regards, we need to do it really well. And also that when they are on campus, that there's got to be something on campus to make it worth their while to come on for. So like you, Stephen, every university in the land is student experience is the reason that we're here. And so we've got to become almost a destination for students. So there's got to be more going on than just the delivery of a lecture or some collaborative working groups. There needs to be more interactive work with students, and there also needs to be more experiential things for students to get involved in whilst they've made the trip to come onto campus to be there, because they're not going to turn up anymore for a 1-hour lecture and then they've got a free day. So there's going to have to be other things going on. We're going to have to be utilising our sports facilities, our wellbeing areas, and having more activity going on that makes our universities a much more interesting, much more holistic experience for students once they actually appear on campus.
I would just pick up on what Donna was saying about the face-to-face. I think there has been some great wins, unfortunately, from COVID. And like in the medical field, we've now had to do GP online consultations. That could be the same example with their tutor, for example. So I think those are the wins. I think what the students are looking for is the immediacy, the agility, the flexibility. And so when they're in the midst of a crisis moment and they can't, answer a question and move on in the essay, they want access to the tutor or the teacher. So I think those face-to-face are those quick 5 minutes. It's just knowing that there's somebody else on the other end of the Zoom call or the Teams call when they ring. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that, from the medical NHS, helplines into the university. The one thing I would say about allowing all students to have maybe freedom of choice of the sort of a hybrid model that we are doing in the office is that we're finding that new hires or new students are really struggling if in the last year they've started a new university and they absolutely have no context. They have no friends, they don't know the building. We've now gone through a year, so you've had the students that were already in university that could manage because they had the contextual relationships built up. The ones that are starting the university experience now in lockdown have no concept whatsoever. And I saw my son, graduating from a university he'd been at for almost 4 years. And while it was sad, he had no graduation and no leaving parties, he actually could finish the course and know that he completed it. Now starting graduate school, he's completely online and he has no context, no social gathering, going to the pub, going to the library. And actually, it's almost like a wasted experience for him. And it's sad in a lot of ways. So I do think that there should be some sense of bringing new students back to meet people, or almost saying 1 day a week or first term or whatever it is, you must come and meet your colleagues, and then you've got a frame of reference to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and it is such a hard thing for so many students to have started and not to have that social experience and face-to-face interaction. But it does sound like we're getting somewhere a bit more positive, and that as Steve and Donna have said, universities are really taking that into account. I'm just going to go to some questions from the audience. They've been sending some in. The first one is a question for Donna. It says they're really interested to hear that you're opening up spaces. You mentioned as large, as flexible, as well ventilated and well lit as possible. Are you able to paint a picture of what sizes these as large as possible new spaces have become, please?
It varies from area to area. I could have shared a wee video with people, but I don't have it to hand. But it's probably about half the the footprint, which is probably going to be about 10,000 square feet in some areas. But it's broken up by different furniture layouts and different types. There's a central core that's got comfort catering in it, but there's no seating in an area that's not brightly lit and access to windows. We've also taken the opportunity to draw down in some ceiling expanding and rattle in some nice LED lighting wherever we can go, because that always improves the feeling of being in a well-lit space, as well as taking down walls and small offices that tended to hug the perimeters. Like Steve, we've got 60s buildings that are concrete, and so you'll probably all be familiar with the kind of structure that I'm talking about. So basically what we were doing is the central core had the stair and the lifts in it, and basically we're opening up out to the outsides. We've done it in a number of areas. I'm happy to share that detail with anyone after this if they want. And we've done it to form postgraduate spaces as well as these other social learning spaces and collaborative workspaces. So it just depends on what your needs are, and you just need to be really clever in how you do your furniture layout to zone it.
Great, thanks, Donna. The next question I've got here is someone says they're really interested in the point about considering student neurodiversity in building planning, and just wanted to know what examples have you seen of this working well, and are universities doing enough to consider this cohort? Would anyone like to jump in on that one? Katrina?
Well, I can say what I think that the university should be doing. I can't say if they are doing it, but as we mentioned before, and I think it sounds like a variety of choice of spaces, so that it's not just all one thing, like the sort of Google-esque sexy, bean bags and coffee pots. It's actually the quiet spaces, which sounds like, from Stephen and Donna, there's already a big push. Probably if the pendulum has swung back to the library, the sense of, I need to study, but it's not just the open carrel that used to be in the library, the open tables. It really is the quiet booths. ADHD people need to have a wall. They're best off working towards facing a wall. The wall can be a booth, it can be something creative like a brick wall. It doesn't have to be a flat painted white wall, but it's something contained and controlled. The acoustics are really important for the neurodiverse. We find that a lot of spaces tend to try to be cool, like the concrete open exposed services, concrete facilities that look lovely, but actually bounce sound around tremendously if you haven't thought about acoustics. Lighting is also really difficult for the neurodiverse. So we've done a lot of work on the lighting. Lighting can be too bright for them. They want really control, so they need to bring the lighting way down. The other area that doesn't get a lot of exposure is wayfinding. You may think that you have good signage and wayfinding, but I can tell you, for somebody that is either nervous or visually impaired or not inclusive, wayfinding can be very difficult when you've got signage coming at you from all different places and pin up notices of this and that and the other happening. So wayfinding, signage, lighting, acoustics. The interesting thing about diversity and inclusion, which is high on everyone's agenda, is also the accessibility question. And a lot more individuals are either can't walk quite as well as they were, or they can't see quite as well, or they're colorblind. And so differential between wall and floor finishes, knowing where to push the cubicle door in the toilets, not just a sea of one thing. Controls that are easy, almost sort of what I call simple, stupid, you know, on, off, does it work? I think is where we need to get back to.
Thanks, Katrina. Yeah, I just wanted, Stephen, sort of opening it out a bit more, how do you consider the needs of sort of a diverse student intake when you're talking about buildings in the estate, and yeah, making sure that they're really inclusive spaces for so many different types of students?
Yeah, I think there isn't a one-size-fits-all model. You know, every student has different needs. I think for me, it's about having meaningful conversations at the early, you know, specifically at the early design stages, but understanding, you know, where you've got existing space, how you can adapt that. It's continuing the dialogue with the student union, for example. You know, I regularly meet with their student union sabbatical officers, but it's actually also about how you go and actually talk to the students as well. Yeah, and you know, I've got 427 staff at University of Surrey in estates and facilities, but you know, I meet with all of my team in different ways in smaller groups, and I've done that either virtually or, you know, face to face pre-COVID. Because the cleaner will know exactly what a kitchen design needs to be, because they would have spoken to the student in an accommodation block. And actually, you know, it's some of it is just about getting the basics right. It's about the type of sink, it's the type of tap, you know, and actually understanding where it works. But it's also about trying things, you know, trying things and saying to students, actually, we're going to do this, we're going to pilot it, we're going to see how it's going to work, we're going to ask you for some feedback. If it doesn't work, we're going to change it. So it's about that constant evolving process. And what I've noticed of, you know, my career in higher education is that every year students bring something new. You know, that every year there's something different, there's something, you know, that's specific to them, you know, a specific group. You know, have a sabbatical officer that will have a specific focus on, for example, you know, equality and diversity one year. You know, another year it'll be about the catering offer. The next year it will be about the cost of accommodation. But it's just about that continued conversation to understand what they think and what they want. Because, you know, however much I might feel inside that, you know, I'm a 19-year-old, you know, young man. I'm not. I'm a middle-aged man, and I don't know what students want as a 19-year-old. But actually, I need to spend time with them and try to understand them.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I just wanted, Donna, do you want to sort of come in and comment on that at all?
Yeah, it was just that neurodiverse students are the ones who are least likely to communicate with you. Certainly face to face or through a focus group or anything. They're the people who will sit in the, we've got experience of this within my family as well. So I know that we don't use bright LEDs, we use warm LEDs, we use acoustic booths wherever we can. And I think basically, although we're opening space up, we're also creating different types of space within that open space. So there is the quiet corners, there is the areas facing the wall, there is acoustic booths that people can go and sit in, and they can go and sit in those. There's solo ones, and there's also ones where they can go with a small number of their cohort with them. There's also larger collaborative work tables. Neurodiversity is, as Katrina says, it's 10% of the population, and there's probably much more of the adult population over the age of 40 that have yet to be diagnosed, because as I am the wrong side of 40, it wasn't a thing when we were young. So there's probably a lot of staff would fall into that category as well. So and a lot of these spaces that we're opening up, they're not just for students, staff can also use them. And I think what we're also trying to do is break down a lot of the walls. So these spaces are for staff and students, but it's also, I know that some lecturers will say to their students, I will be in the nook at such and such a time if anybody wanted drops by and catch a coffee if they've got anything they want to discuss with me. Clearly that was post-COVID. But I think that's a nice and more familiar way, and it's more that someone who's neurodiverse is more likely to engage with, because they think it's going to be a one-to-one, and it's in a friendly setting. So they're more likely to come in and have that discussion. Bear in mind that a lot of the people who are neurodiverse are really high functioning, so they're most likely that they will be at university and they'll be really high achievers. But don't always confuse that with their ability to communicate, because verbal communication is not always, it doesn't mean they're non-verbal, it just means that they don't like talking to people, and particularly. So we've just got to try and engage with them. It's difficult, I know, but as Stephen says, it's like everyone else that we're trying to cater for under the equalities. We're just trying to make sure that everyone who has a special requirement is catered for. That's why we're changing all our signage. I thought the comment on wayfinding was really interesting, Katrina. We're changing all our signage to black backgrounds with white letters, so for partially sighted it's much easier to see, but also, and even colourblind, if you've got a problem against colour, it's much easier for people to find their way about, and just try and remove some of the mystique and the confusion about being on campus and university.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting, and unfortunately it's all we've got time for, but I just want to thank you all for a really interesting discussion, and I think it's really nice to have really address some of the positives and look at, you know, the ways that things are going to improve in the future. So yeah, thanks to the panel. That was great.